The lawyers at Hartwick and Pruitt had a view of Lake Ontario from the 42nd floor that would have been breathtaking on any other morning. Diane Moreau did not look at it. She looked at the line on the bottom of the page, where her name was supposed to go. The pen they'd given her was weighted, the kind that cost more than her first car. She wondered if they issued it deliberately. Something too heavy to hold comfortably, something that made the moment feel significant. Her hand didn't shake. She'd expected it to shake. Instead, she felt perfectly still in the way a person goes still when they've used up all the feeling they had. Across the table, Patrick Rourke checked his phone. He didn't look at her. He'd stopped doing that weeks ago, maybe longer, and she'd only now traced the exact day it had started. He was wearing the navy suit she'd picked out for him at Holt Renfrew 3 Christmases ago. The cufflinks were new. She didn't recognize them. His lawyer said something about the timeline for asset division. Her lawyer nodded. The window behind them framed a gray October sky and the flat silver surface of the lake. Diane pressed the pen to the paper and signed. The ink settled into her name, like it had always planned to end up there. 40 minutes later, she stood on Bay Street with the wind coming off the water, and she thought, so that's what 7 years feels like when it's over. One pen stroke. A folder of papers slid into a briefcase, a door that closes without ceremony. She was 38 years old, 7 months pregnant, and entirely alone on one of the busiest streets in Toronto. She didn't take a cab. She walked south toward the path, one hand on the strap of her bag, the other resting on the side of her belly where she could feel the faint pressure of a kick. The underground concourse hummed with lunchtime commuters. She stopped at a Tim Hortons counter and ordered a tea she couldn't finish, and sat at a small table near the window that looked out on nothing except more concourse, more strangers, more people with somewhere urgent to be. She had known for 6 weeks that Patrick had been seeing Kira Bellamy. Most of Toronto's fitness and media circles already knew. The photographs had appeared first on gossip accounts, Patrick and Kira leaving the Spoke Club. Patrick and Kira at a Raptors game in seats Diane recognized, because she'd been the one to buy the season tickets that year. Kira was 26, had 3 million Instagram followers, and a face that looked like it had been designed specifically to appear beside a man like Patrick in exactly those kinds of photographs. The divorce had been his idea. He'd been kind about it, which was almost worse. He'd said things like, "We've grown in different directions, and I want you to be happy," and she'd sat across from him in their annex kitchen and felt nothing land right, every sentence hitting the wrong place. And she hadn't cried until after he'd left, and she was standing at the sink doing dishes at 11 at night, with the water running hot over her wrists. She hadn't told him about the pregnancy yet. She'd been waiting for the right moment, and then the right moment had stopped existing. When she finally did tell him, 3 weeks after she'd taken the test, he'd gone very quiet. Then he'd said, "Are you sure this is the best time?" As though timing were something a pregnancy consulted before arriving. The prenuptial agreement had been drafted by his firm's family law division. Her lawyer, a kind woman at a small Queen West practice who handled mostly wills and residential real estate, had flagged one clause as unusual, but Diane had signed it anyway, 5 years in, wanting to believe it was standard. It wasn't. The clause structured any pregnancy-related claims under spousal support in a way that, in practice, gave her almost nothing. Patrick's legal team had used it to ensure the financial settlement would cover her for 3 months and nothing more. 3 months. She had a baby coming. She had a condo in the Danforth she couldn't carry alone, on a cardiologist residence. Salary. Because she'd taken a research year at Toronto General that cut her clinical income in half. A decision she'd made because Patrick had asked her to, because he'd said the timing was better for their family. And she had trusted him with the timing of her own career. She found out she was carrying twins at a prenatal appointment at Mount Sinai on a Thursday afternoon. The sonographer moved the probe across her stomach, paused, moved it back, and said very carefully, "Dr. Moreau, I want to confirm something. Did anyone mention twins to you at your initial scan?" Nobody had. She was alone in the room. There was a plastic chair in the corner that was clearly meant for a partner, and it sat empty, and she looked at it for a long time after the sonographer left. Her friend Becca Flannery arrived that evening with groceries. and a bottle of sparkling water she'd tied a bow around, because Becca found ceremony in small things, and Diane had always loved that about her. Becca was a family law litigator at a downtown firm. Sharp, methodical. The kind of person who processed emotion the way some people process spreadsheets. "Tell me everything," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "Two," Diane said. Becca looked at her for a moment. "Twins." "Twins." Becca sat down at the kitchen table. She was quiet for exactly 4 seconds, which was a long time for Becca. Then she said, "Okay, this is actually better." Diane almost laughed. "How?" "Because 2 is harder to ignore than 1. He can't make 2 children disappear the way he planned to make 1 inconvenience disappear." She opened her laptop. "Walk me through the prenup clause again." The NDA arrived by courier on a Monday. It came in a stiff envelope from Rourke and Oldham, Patrick's firm, which was technically a conflict of interest. But Patrick had never let small ironies slow him down. The offer included a settlement that covered 8 months of rent, which she understood to mean he'd calculated her runway and shaved a little off each end. In exchange, complete public silence about the marriage, the pregnancy, and anything he classified as reputational matter. The final paragraph contained language about the children. A reference to voluntary forfeiture of public commentary rights pertaining to the health and circumstances of shared minor dependents. She read it 3 times. She understood exactly what it meant. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. "You should stop embarrassing yourself. He's moved on. Those kids deserve better than a mother who can't let go." She didn't need the number. The phrasing had a specific cadence, the particular cruelty that arrives wrapped in fake concern. She put the phone face down on the table. Then she picked up the NDA and tore it in half. Then she tore those halves again. Then she kept going until the pieces were too small to bother with, and they scattered across the kitchen floor, and she stood there breathing, and she said out loud to the empty apartment, "He doesn't get to write the ending." She called Becca at 7 in the morning. "We're filing. Full medical coverage under spousal obligation. Both children." Becca said, "I've had the paperwork ready for 9 days." The subway was nearly empty at 11:15 on a Thursday night. Diane had stayed late at the hospital reviewing case files. Her maternity leave was approaching, and she wanted to hand off cleanly. The Line 1 platform at Eglinton smelled like cold concrete and the particular staleness of tunnels in winter. She sat in the second car with her bag on her lap and her eyes half closed. She'd seen the news that morning. Patrick and Kira had married at a private ceremony in Muskoka, a small piece in the society pages. A photo of Kira in something backless and luminous. Patrick with his hand at the small of her back. Both of them looking like people who had arranged their faces for exactly this photograph. The train lurched between Davisville and St. Clair. A deep cramp folded through her abdomen, low and sudden. She gripped the seat rail. "Are you all right?" The man was sitting 2 seats down. Dark coat, reading something on his phone. He'd looked up the moment she made a sound she hadn't meant to make. "I'm fine," she said. "Braxton Hicks. I've been having them." He didn't sit back down. He stood and moved toward her, unhurried, the way people move when they aren't panicking but have decided to be useful. "How far apart?" she told him. Another one came while she was talking. His expression didn't change, but he pressed the emergency intercom and spoke to the operator in a level voice, and within 4 minutes the train had stopped at St. Clair, and a platform worker was meeting them at the doors. "I'm Lachlan Morrow," he said, as he helped her up the stairs toward the street where a cab was already waiting. "Diane Moreau," she said, "you really don't have to." "You're late in a twin pregnancy and having contractions 11 minutes apart," he said. "I'm coming to the hospital." At Mount Sinai, the attending confirmed false labor, preterm contractions brought on by stress and dehydration and far too many late nights. "You need rest," she said. "Real rest, not the kind where you bring files home." Diane sat in the observation bay afterward, a blanket over her legs, feeling the specific exhaustion of someone who has held themselves together for 4 months and is running out of material. Her phone had 3 unread messages from Patrick's lawyer about the custody filing she and Becca had submitted that week. Patrick was now petitioning for shared custody, a move that arrived like a slap. given that he hadn't sent a single message asking about the pregnancy since the divorce was finalized. She heard footsteps and looked up. Lachlan was back. He'd brought 2 cups of tea and a small packet of crackers, which he set on the tray table without making a production of it. "I Googled you," she said. He sat down in the chair beside the bed. "I assumed you would." "Moral capital. Your foundation funds 3 pediatric wards in Ontario." She paused. "You lost your wife 4 years ago." "Cystic fibrosis. She was 34. She didn't say she was sorry. It felt too small. "Why were you on the subway at 11 at night?" "I was coming from the Parkdale Health Center. We fund their maternity outreach program." He looked at his hands for a moment. "I take the subway because if I arrive in a car with a driver, the staff spends the whole visit treating me like a guest instead of talking to me. It's a good program, the kind that stays small because nobody notices it." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," he said, and she couldn't tell exactly what he meant by that, but it didn't feel like a small thing. 3 days after the hospital, a photograph ran in a gossip column. Someone had caught them leaving the maternity ward. The caption implied a relationship. By morning, it had been picked up by 3 national entertainment sites, and the comments were doing what comments do. Lachlan's sister, Nadia Morrow, appeared at Diane's condo 2 days later with coffee, and the kind of calm that suggested she had managed crises before. "The story will keep moving unless we give it somewhere to land," she said. "We put out a statement from the foundation. You're receiving support through our maternal health initiative. It's true, it's simple, it's enough." "I don't want to be a cause," Diane said. "You're already a headline," Nadia said. "A cause is better." The custody hearing was held at the courthouse on University Avenue on a Tuesday in February. Patrick arrived with 2 lawyers and a composed expression. He'd had time to prepare his narrative. The concerned father, the man who wanted to be present, who had been kept at a distance by a hostile ex-wife. It unraveled faster than Diane expected. Becca had built the file carefully. No prenatal appointments attended. No messages asking about health or progress after the divorce. A voicemail Patrick had left during a call Diane had accidentally pocket-recorded 3 months earlier, in which he'd told someone on his end, "She can deal with it. I'm not rearranging my life around a pregnancy I didn't agree to." The courtroom went quiet when Becca played it. Patrick's lawyer objected. The judge allowed it. When Diane spoke, her voice was level. She'd practiced being level. "He wasn't there when I found out there were 2 of them. He wasn't at any appointment. He sent a courier with an NDA instead of calling to ask how I was. And now, 4 months after I filed for medical coverage for our children, he's discovered he wants to be a father." She looked at the judge steadily. "He doesn't want custody. He wants a story that works better for him than the one that's currently in print." The judge did not grant shared custody. She ordered supervised access pending further review and full medical coverage backdated to the date of the petition. Outside on University Avenue, Patrick caught up with them near the parking structure. He stood close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the thing he was working to keep controlled. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. Diane had thought about this moment for weeks. She'd imagined rage, or the urge to say something that would cut exactly the right way. What she actually felt was tired, and underneath that, something quiet and certain, like a door she'd just realized she didn't need to open anymore. "No," she said, "I really won't." The twins arrived at 36 weeks on a Tuesday in March, at 3 in the morning. 2 girls. Both small, both breathing on their own within minutes, which the attending described as remarkable, and which Diane received as the only word that had felt accurate in months. Lachlan was in the waiting room. He'd driven her when the contractions started in earnest, and he'd sat out there for 7 hours. When the nurse said there was someone asking about her, she knew without being told. He came in quietly. He looked like a man who had been sitting very still for a long time and was trying not to show it. 2 girls, she said. He sat down beside the bed. His eyes were red in a way he was clearly not going to mention. "What are their names?" "Marguerite," she said, "and June." He nodded slowly. "Those are serious names." "They're serious people," she said. "I could already tell." He stayed until she slept. When she woke, he was gone, but there was a note on the tray table in handwriting she'd never seen before. It said, "They're both doing well. Nadia's bringing your overnight bag. I'll be back at 7. She folded the note and kept it. They were married in the Rosedale garden in June, when the wisteria was out and the air tasted like the first warm weekend after a long spring. 11 people attended: Becca, Nadia, the housekeeper who had become one of Diane's anchors through the long winter, 2 of Lachlan's oldest friends, and the girls, who slept through most of the ceremony in matching linen dresses. The registrar read a short passage Nadia had chosen, and Lachlan slipped a simple gold band onto Diane's finger and looked at her the way someone looks at a thing they have decided to be careful with forever. Becca cried. She'd told everyone in advance that she wouldn't, and then cried openly in a way that made the whole afternoon feel more real. 3 months after the wedding, Lachlan submitted the adoption application. He drove to the family court office on a Wednesday morning and filed the paperwork himself. No announcement, no ceremony. When it was granted, he told Diane over dinner, quietly, the way he delivered everything that mattered, without performance. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she reached across the table and held his hand, and that was enough. The Morrow Foundation Gala was held at the Four Seasons in late September. It was the first time Diane had appeared at a public event since the custody hearing, and the room registered who she was the moment they walked in. She could feel it in the way the noise shifted. She wore dark blue. Lachlan's hand was warm at her back. Kira Bellamy was there with Patrick near the champagne table, in something silver that caught every light in the room. She looked exactly like her photographs. When their paths crossed, Kira spoke first. "Diane, you look wonderful. Marriage clearly agrees with you." Diane looked at her. There was something tired beneath the smile, something Kira was working around, and Diane recognized it in the way you recognize something you used to wear yourself. "Thank you," she said simply. "I hope the evening's good for you." She turned away before the conversation could redirect itself. Patrick found her 20 minutes later, near the edge of the room. He still wore the bearing of a man accustomed to being the most important person wherever he stood, but it sat differently on him now. Something had gone loose in it. "Diane," he said, "what you've built, it's impressive." She didn't thank him. "Is there something you need, Patrick?" He looked at the floor for a moment. "Nadia sent me photographs from the baptism. The girls." He said it carefully, as though the words were borrowed and he wasn't sure he was allowed to use them. "They look like you." She said nothing. "I know I have no standing," he said. He reached into his jacket and took out a small envelope. "For their education. No conditions, no publicity, nothing attached." He set it on the ledger table beside them. "I know I don't deserve the credit for it." She looked at the envelope. She thought about what it meant to accept it. Not for herself, but for 2 small girls who would grow up not knowing the particular weight of the year before they were born. She picked it up. She didn't say thank you. She said, "Make it right with the firm, Patrick. Whatever you've been covering in those billing accounts, make it right before someone else finds it first." He went still. "How did you?" "Because you used the same irregularities in our personal accounts that I noticed in the prenuptial invoices. I'm a cardiologist, not a forensic accountant, but I can read a pattern." She held his gaze. "I haven't told anyone. That's your choice to make." She paused. "But make it soon." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely name. Part shame, part the specific look of a person who has just been seen more clearly than they prepared for. She walked back to Lachlan, who looked up with a question in his eyes that he didn't ask out loud. She was fine. She was more than fine. Patrick Rourke submitted a voluntary disclosure to the Law Society of Ontario 6 weeks later. The resulting review covered billing irregularities across 14 client accounts spanning 4 years. He cooperated fully. He lost his partnership. It was reported in the Globe and Mail on a Tuesday, below the fold, which felt right. Not a headline, just a consequence. Kira gave a long interview to a podcast in October. She spoke honestly and without particular flattery to either herself or Patrick. It was the most real thing Diane had ever seen from her. She listened to 10 minutes of it in the car on the way to the hospital one morning, and then turned it off, not out of anger, but because it simply wasn't hers to carry anymore. Winter returned to Toronto the way it always does, suddenly and without apology, whitening everything overnight. Marguerite and June discovered snow that December with a gravity that made Lachlan laugh in a way Diane had come to think of as her favorite sound in the world. Unprepared, complete, with nothing held back. The foundation announced its maternal health housing initiative in January. 3 facilities across the GTA, affordable accommodation and clinical support for single mothers in high-risk pregnancies. Diane was listed as co-chair. The announcement received 2 minutes on the national news, and she watched it in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, and Becca texted her a single line. There it is. There it was. On the night they officially opened the first building, a converted property in Parkdale, 6 blocks from the health center Lachlan had been returning from on the night they met. Diane stood near the window of the common room and looked out at the street below. The city was dark and cold and entirely itself, the way Toronto is in January, vast and unhurried and indifferent to individual stories. Lachlan found her there a few minutes later and didn't say anything for a while, which she appreciated. That was one of the things she'd come to understand about him. He'd learned, in the particular school of loss, that sometimes the right presence is a quiet one. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" she said. "Tell me." That contraction on the subway. She watched a streetcar crawl up Roncesvalles in the snow below. "I used to think of it as the worst night of that whole year. Alone 11 at night, coming home from a hospital where I'd been pretending I was fine for 8 hours. She paused. "I don't think of it that way anymore." He looked at her. "It was the night something changed direction," she said. "I didn't know it yet, but that's what it was." She leaned her shoulder against his arm. "Pain doesn't tell you where you're going. It just tells you something's moving." He put his hand over hers without a word. Outside, the snow had started again. Toronto fell quiet under it, the way cities do when the weather finally asks them to. She was 39 years old. She had 2 daughters who were going to have strong opinions about everything, and the temperaments to back them up. She had a husband who understood silence. She had a friend who had shown up with sparkling water tied with a bow on the worst night of her life. She had work that was going to matter to people she would never meet, which was the kind of work she'd always wanted, and hadn't known how to name until now. She had, against every reasonable expectation of that October morning on Bay Street, everything she needed. And, for the first time in longer than she could trace, she stopped waiting for something to take it away.